We're beyond stress, but I fight for peace. That's what the problem is. War's big biz, ask an economist. They're speaking volumes, just calling anti-war and anti-American synonymous. Back in the day, I'd have gotten blacklisted just for speaking up. Hoover probably would have screamed communist. I want black and brown unity, but cats get out and bring their unity.
Big Business by Dilated Peoples here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. We're broadcasting on over 700 stations, Pacifica and NPR stations, low-power FM college and community radio stations, on public access TV and PBS TV stations, and both TV satellite networks. Dish Network Channel 9415, Free Speech TV 9410, Link TV, and Direct TV Channel 375. And we're video and audio podcasting at democracynow.org. Our headlines are also available in Spanish for any radio station to take, as almost 200 are. I'm Amy Goodman as we continue our conversation with Tim Shorrock. Spies for Hire is his book, The Secret World of Intelligence Outsourcing. Tim, finishing up on Carlyle taking over Booz Allen, if approved. Of course, Carlyle gained great notoriety after the September 11th attacks. They were having their big meeting in Washington at the Hay Adams, and their big investors, some of their big investors, with the bin Laden family, not Osama bin Laden, but bin Laden, other bin Laden brothers. And in the end, you know, there were the Bushes, there were James Baker, and there were the bin Ladens. They were forced to sell out. Is that right?
Yeah, after that news appeared, I think it was first reported in the Wall Street Journal, they quickly asked the bin Laden family to withdraw their investment, which they did. But they have a lot of investment from, I mean, you know, Carlyle's a private equity fund. What they do is they get investments from very large investment funds, many of them overseas, many American pension funds controlled by U.S. unions, such as the Service Employees International Union, have very large investments in Carlyle. The California Public Employees Retirement System, for example, actually owns 5% of the Carlyle Group. So they're well connected to various facets of American capital. And yes, the bin Ladens pulled out. Lately, they've had investment from a large government investment fund in Abu Dhabi. But a lot of these people, as you mentioned earlier, like George Bush Sr. and James Baker, have withdrawn. But they still employ many people who have come from high-level positions within government, and clearly have analyzed what the markets are and what potential profit there is in a company like Booz Allen.
So can you talk about what does it mean when private companies are working with the CIA in terms of the top secret information that they have? You begin your prologue with a man named John Humphrey, a former CIA officer. Talk about what he said.
Well, I was at an intelligence conference, and this man he was from Khaki International, was speaking about sort of the general experience of contractors, and he was saying how difficult it was to be in a position like in Abu Ghraib when you're a contractor and you have the government asking you to do things, and the rules are unclear, and he was expressing some real discomfort about a contractor being in that role. And I was rather stunned because I had never heard anyone from Khaki express any remorse or any second thoughts about what had happened at Abu Ghraib. Their CEO, his name is Jack London, went on a huge media offensive, which they're still on. They just published a little pamphlet about how badly they were treated during the Abu Ghraib scandal. But the fact is, you have contractors like this that create a profit center out of interrogating enemy prisoners. They create a profit center out of interrogating prisoners in Guantanamo. When did this begin to be part of American capitalism, when you have very sensitive operations like this? In some cases, operations we shouldn't even be doing become profit centers. I think this is an extremely dangerous trend, and lately there's been some attempts in Congress. Right now there's an attempt in Congress to have some legislation that would keep contractors out of this area of interrogation, keep them out of the area of renditions where they're flying people, capturing people in places like Syria or in Italy, and flying them to places where they can be tortured by other governments. There's been private corporations involved in that as well.
And you point out chain of command issues, where you will have one of these private contractors telling soldiers what to do.
Well, that's exactly, apparently, what happened in Abu Ghraib. And the problem is, you know, there's been a lot of testimony, and there's been a really good film was made about that included shots from Abu Ghraib and interviews with prisoners. And there's now a lawsuit that's been filed by the Center for Constitutional Rights against Khaki International for its role there. But from what we do know from testimony at some of the trials of the lower-level people that were at Abu Ghraib that were eventually convicted for their role in the abuse, is that, in fact, some of the worst practices there were endorsed and pushed by some of these contractors. They claim in the trials and some of the other testimony from people from Khaki International, for example, introducing the use of attack dogs to frighten and terrorize prisoners there. That was actually, in part, introduced by individuals from this company. And, you know, we know the people at the top, Donald Rumsfeld, Stephen Cambone, and others who wanted to step up the practices there at Abu Ghraib. They've always escaped responsibility, and so did the companies. And this problem of, like, where is the legal responsibility when they break the law is still yet to be clarified.
Tim Shorrock, you write about a report that was suppressed last year, official information about the scope of intelligence outsourcing. Can you talk about what happened?
Well, when I started writing this book and researching this book, I was sort of drawing on figures I'd done. I did an article for Mother Jones a few years ago where I had estimated, based on interviews with quite a few people here in Washington, that the total outsourcing in intelligence was about 50%. About half the budget at that time I estimated was being spent on contracts. And by 2006 or so, I was looking for some firm figures, 2007. And finally, the Office of Director of National Intelligence actually commissioned an internal study. They ordered all the agencies, all the 16 agencies of the intelligence community, to provide them with figures about how much contracting went on in their specific agencies, what the major companies were, the percentage, the breakdown of the workforce between contractors and government employees. And they put this report together. There was a lot of press reports in the New York Times, LA Times, other places that were following this, where people were expecting, and it seemed like they were going to actually release sort of the basic, you know, the top figures of this, so the American people and Congress would get a good idea of the extent of contracting. But when the time came to release this report, Admiral McConnell, who of course had come from one of the major contractors and had knowledge of and contacts with all the companies that were involved, they decided not to put it out. And so I think the report was released to certain members of Congress who have access to highly classified material, but it was not released in general in Congress, and certainly not to the American people. But the figure that I got about a year ago, I got a leaked document that was an unclassified document that was a pie chart that showed 70%, that's 70% of our intelligence budget money going into the hands of private contractors. So the fact is that, you know, the American people aren't told this by the American government, and many people in Congress have no idea of the extent of contracting, and it's supposed to be their job to provide oversight to our intelligence community. And when you have, they don't even have knowledge of what's going on with 70% of the budget, that makes oversight a little bit of a joke.
The Office of the Director of National Intelligence ordering a study of contracting with the 16 agencies that make up the community. When it came time to release, the office said no, they refused to make it public?
That's right. They said this information would help America's enemies. It would, you know, it basically would help, you know, I guess they were talking about Al-Qaeda. If Al-Qaeda or somebody like that knew that, you know, 50% of the CIA was outsourced, that would help them in some way. But that's all, you know, you can figure a lot of this stuff out from public information. I talked to a lot of people and got some pretty firm estimates. Some of the agencies, to their credit, do provide a breakdown. For example, the Defense Intelligence Agency, which provides intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of Defense, told me that 35% of their workforce is private sector contractors. The National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, which provides imagery, secret satellite imagery and mapping to military units and also national intelligence agencies, their workforce is 50% contractors. The National Reconnaissance Office, which is one of our most secret agencies and controls all military spy satellites, their contracted workforce is 95%. So it's a huge proportion of their workforce.